The last 4 months, I just haven't been able to do anything. I haven't really been able to read the books that I had ordered. So I remember I had pre-ordered both of your books, and they came, and then I put them on my shelf, like next to the rocking chair. So like I'd be up late at night with my baby, and I'd be looking at the books like, God damn it, I wish I could just like start reading these.
Wow.
I was just like on my feet all the time. Like I just felt like I wasn't able to do like any of my comic work or like anything besides what needed to be done in the household. So like now I'm kind of back at it. Like, you know, I'm so happy that you were patient enough with me, because I wanted to talk to you before your books even came out, you know? So,
oh man, thank you. I'm just, dude, I'm a huge fan of the show. So like, I'm just honored to be here and get to meet you.
Well, actually, I should ask that question later, but I wanted, because you grew up reading comics, right? Like superhero. I think we're the same age, pretty much.
Yeah, I'm 40. You are?
I'm 37, but I'm close
yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
I mean, we both remember when Spawn #1 came out, I'm sure.
For sure. I was there.
Did you buy all that stuff?
I like got programmed early by like Stan Lee's like Make Mine Marvel, like total bullshit. And when like all my favorite artists, specifically like Jim Lee, like jumped to Image, I felt like, and left my favorite X-Men books, I felt so betrayed that I was like, I'm not buying this crap, which was actually good timing, because that was also the time when I just got over superheroes. So like I that's a little bit of a lie. I continued to read X-Men through like Joe Madureira and all that stuff, but very soon, like, thank God for Stray Bullets and Bone and THB and those books that kind of like were my pivot off of superheroes, and then eventually were a stepping stone to like stuff like Chester Brown.
Yeah. Did you keep all of your comics from your childhood? You still have that stuff?
I kept like the stuff that had either like, I kept the stuff that had nostalgic, like really strong nostalgic value, which is just like a short box, like one short box or something. And because I live in New York, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. Like I have like a 1 in, 1 out rule where like most of the books on my shelf came out in the last year, because I just like, I don't keep books. I give them away. I just don't have space for them. But I keep the ones that I are really important to me, either for nostalgia or just like, I'm like, I want to copy this later or something.
Yeah, I want to copy this later. Yeah, I do that too. I'm like, I need to get rid of some of this stuff, but it's like, oh yeah, but I might have value. Like I might want to rip this off, or I can take something from the way this person wrote this thing, or you know.
Yeah, like a lot of, it's funny, like on this level, like my favorite artists, again, talking about nostalgia and stuff, like growing up, Jim Lee was like my idol. And he's probably the only cartoonist where if I met today, I'd be like still excited.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's just a childhood hero. But like looking back at his comics, like I think my favorite work of his is like the X-Men cards he made in 1990. Like the actual comics themselves are like almost unreadable.
How do you feel about like immediate art? Because in no one else, it's like the antithesis of like immediate art. Like it seems like it's like there were so many versions of it, you had to keep paring down your art style until you got to the perfect simplification of what you wanted to draw. But it's like, how do you feel about reading comic artwork that's very immediate? Like, can you appreciate it, or is it just not what you want to take in?
Can I appreciate work that's immediate?
Yeah, like you know, if you're like, I just want to read art that is going to give me something that I can use, that I can take, you know. You want to stay away from stuff that's really immediate and expressive, like Gary Panter style or something, because you're like, this is going to influence me into a aesthetic direction that I'm trying to stay away from.
I've been thinking about this exact question so much lately, because like the version of comics that I do, which is like spend 2 years drafting a 100-page graphic novel, is obviously unsustainable. Like it's a pure passion project. And so I thought about this a lot. And also, like, to your point, like Gary Panter, I love that you brought him up, because he is kind of my, like, if I was to think of like, who is, because a lot of like the joy, like there's the, you know, power comics or whatever, or like people that collect that kind of stuff. Like the joy is kind of, it's like watching a good punk band Like it's the energy and the spirit of that live performance. Like listening to like punk records is kind of misses the point. It's like it's all about the live show, right? And I appreciate all that stuff, but that's the exact thing, is like it doesn't work on a record. And so I like both. I like both. I like the kind of virtuoso improv performance that maybe like the monthly Marvel guys were doing back in the day, but I don't want to reread that stuff. You know, I'll read it once.
Yeah.
Gary Panter is kind of like he's interesting because he's almost the perfect example, because his art is so beautiful and visceral and immediate, but also like those comics I find extremely tedious to read.
Yeah.
I think almost by design, they're tedious to read. Whereas like books that maybe went through a lot of drafts, they don't have like that punk rock energy, but like, I don't know, the way I think about it is it's like, if you're John Coltrane, you can make a jazz masterpiece. But if you're not John Coltrane, your only chance at making a masterpiece is through like many, many, many drafts. And by the way, Noah, I would consider you a John Coltrane. Like it blows my mind what you do in how off the cuff it feels. And so like I have nothing but like your work super inspires me on that level. Your last issue of Blammo with those kids like what is it called, like before the internet,
Pre-social media days.
social media days, those are so fun, dude, and they feel off the cuff. I don't know how many did those go through drafts.
No, I don't do any drafts.
Yeah, I didn't get that impression, but they feel, I mean, so like dude, like that, I find that stuff super inspiring.
That's high.
Yeah.
That's a high compliment. I appreciate that. And because that was my childhood, you know, all that stuff is based off my own upbringing in Arizona, which ties back into you, because Night Fisher is so like that really resonates with me, because that's sort of young 90s like masculinity testing and stuff like that is exactly what I had to endure. Like it's just a constant, you can't show any weakness. You're kind of pushing each other to see how far you'll go in the name of masculinity, you know, like as far as like doing dumb things. And I don't know if that exists so much for young men anymore, but so I wonder, how does that, have you read any new reviews of that book?
I haven't. I mean, like a little bit, not really, actually. I don't think like the new edition got reviewed. Oh, then the Times did the New York Times did like a little bit, like a blurb on it. But I'm like, I appreciate that reading. I do, like in rereading it, like whatever, 17 years after I drew it, I did feel like, oh, this is about 90s masculinity. Like that's what this book, I mean, it's about a few other things, but somehow that's the kind of thing that stuck out to me looking at it in hindsight.
Yeah.
And I also am curious, like when I was repackaging it, you know, part of the conversation was like, do you want to like put, you know, 10, 20 pages of back matter in this to make it more collectible or something? And I was like, I really don't want to celebrate this thing. Like I would rather try to repackage it as like a brand new thing for new readers. And so like I like kind of did the thing that you're never supposed to do, which is like I spent 2 months like redrawing a bunch of stuff and like kind of making it a smoother read, because I really, it wasn't about me like crystallizing this old book. I was actually trying to like push it out and see how a new generation reacts to it. So I was thinking about like, are kids the age of this protagonist gonna even relate to this like masculinity testing in the same way? And like I don't know. I mean, the kids that I talk to today are my students at art school, and I think that they're kind of a different sample set than necessarily like kids doing meth in Hawaii or Arizona.
Yeah. There was a 16-year break between Night Fisher and no one else. Are you at all ashamed of that break?
Ashamed is a strong word. I'll say this is that like, I'll put it this way, like, so I've told this story before, but like Fantagraphics was asking me to repackage Night Fisher for a lot of years, and it was shame that made me not want to repackage it. Both the shame of like kind of what I considered flaws in that book, but also shame of like, I'm not gonna like, without a new book, I don't want to like celebrate the old one. I just feel like a loser doing that. But No, life happens. Like I feel like I did this, I had this other career. And honestly, like I'm mostly uh, you know, a editorial illustrator at this point in my life. And honestly, I think to some degree it was like finding success in that field that it's like, well, I'm successful in this one career, so like I can take risks in this other one. Like I don't have like I can like take 2 years off, basically live off my savings, make a graphic novel, and like if nobody cares, like it's okay. I have this other career. Like, and it in that sense, it actually gave me a lot of strength and power to make comics. So I don't know. It's a like anything, it has its positive and its negative.
Did you do any
Yeah.
mini comics?
During that period, no. I mean, the only other comics I did during that period were like short stuff that appeared in the New Yorker for the most part, like one pagers here and there. Yeah.
And do you have any interest in collecting that material?
Uh, Not really. I don't know. I've thought about it. There's not quite enough of it, and it's not quite good. It's not that great. Um,
What about for $2,000?
for $2,000, no. For $2,000, no. I don't know. If somebody else, I don't know. So like, are you do you patron? Are you a Patreon supporter of Chester Brown?
Uh,
Or is this something you don't want to admit or
no,
not
no,
admit?
no, I'm not. But I know about it because I have friends that are.
Like he does those like I'm not a collector at this point, as I mentioned. Like I give books away,
Mm.
but like the one set of comics that I actually like covet are the minis that he only gives his Patreon supporters.
Yeah.
And like that, there is something kind of cool about making like these like secret comics that nobody will ever actually see unless you like have this backdoor, and they're genuinely scarce.
Yeah.
There's something kind of fun about that in like a very like collector way. So to answer your question, maybe some version of that where it's not actually like a big publicity seeking thing, but it's actually like, here's a little thing, secret thing that you can find somewhere. I don't know.
I feel like anything you do, like you're like this blessed person that like, you got into comics, you put out a book and you got all these awards, and then you got into illustration, you got all these awards, and you got like the top clients. You had a New Yorker cover that like the Chinese government reposted. It's like you're like this. You have the Midas touch for art.
Man, what people don't see is that like so on this topic of like collecting stuff. So I've never done a lot of the convention. I've never really done a convention. I've never had my own table at a convention until last month when I was at the Maui Comic Con, which was really fun. It was my first time actually tabling at a convention.
Cool.
And I thought, so on this conversation about like minis and reprinting stuff, like I thought like, well, I've done like illustration for 16 years. What if I like go do some print on demand thing and like collect like the best illustrations and some short comics and just make some kind of like this, exactly what we're talking about, this kind of like zine that you can only get in person. And I look back at my 16-year illustration career. A lot of it is stuff no one's ever seen before.
Mhm.
And I got actually genuinely depressed because I realized that while for 16 years, I figured out a way to have like almost a middle-class life in Brooklyn and like go on like meet people and have like a normal life in the big city. I hate like all that work. And I'm not being humble here. Like the work is just uninteresting to anyone that did not read that article that it accompanied in that magazine. Like it's like they're drawings that were next to some investment magazine thing about like a chart of like how to save for retirement. Like they are not interesting in any way except to make a really boring article slightly more palatable, right? And I spent 16 years of my life like doing that, and I would do it again. I mean, and those are those are the kind of the ladder that you have to climb to eventually get the good clients, and like that's how I built up the skills, and that's how I kind of got my name out there. And I wouldn't do anything differently, but I am like super in admiration of like professional cartoonists like yourself, where like whether you are necessarily proud of like, there's different degrees, I'm sure, of what you're proud of in your past work, but at the same time, it's all your work. It's
Yeah.
all like your statement. It all builds to your oeuvre in a way that like I lost 16 years of oeuvre.
Well, how many of those comics that you've done for magazines or like autobiographical, like the one you did for the New Yorker in the summer,
Mhm.
how many of those exist?
Not many. I mean, I've probably done like five, let's see, 4, 8, about maybe 9 pages worth of like nine full page comics, 9 pages worth of comics for the New Yorker,
Yeah.
total. And then there's like comics like here and there that are like, I wrote them, but they're not that interesting. They're like, they were written for like specific magazines. Like I did a comic about like a spider, like a certain species of spider that was introduced to Maui for like a science magazine at one point. It's just not that, it's interesting maybe if you read that magazine, but again, it's not like a general interest story that people would want to read.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's just like, yeah, a lot of that work, but you know, you do what you can. Like the other way I look at it is like, the other thing about illustration is I actually get this, like the same feedback, the same like creative high and satisfaction of finishing something. It's almost stronger in illustration because you have like a pretty, you finish this kind of pretty thing and it's done in like less than a week. So you get this like awesome, like slot machine feedback of like positive feedback of like, I finished something, I'm productive. And I got to like craft, I got to craft something, you know, that positive feedback that we get from, that everybody or most people get from cooking or weaving a blanket or whatever. Like I get that positive feedback. The difference is that 16 years later, I go through my stuff and I'm just like, I hate all this, you know?
Like in between doing all that work, you were trying to write No One Else. That was like your little side project or something?
Yeah, I always have like 4 kind of narratives on the burner that I'm
Oh,
just
wow.
kind of thinking about and just, you know, like just kind of playing around with, and some of them like fade in and out, some of them disappear. Dude, I've got stacks of like unfinished graphic novels that I just kind of abandon.
No kidding. Oh, shit, I didn't
Yeah.
know that. So wait, how do you, what's your process like for writing a graphic novel?
For the stacks, one of the reasons I abandoned them was because they're like a lot of them are on paper.
Mhm.
But for No One Else, it's like, so like back to like kind of illustration, like one of the things about illustration that you learn real quick is that like the fee that they offer you up front, um, for the sake of easy numbers, like it's $1,000,
Mhm.
like 50%, $500 of that is for the, or less is for the final product. What they're actually paying you for is for like sketches and revisions. That's most of the work you're going to do.
Mhm.
And I think like part of that ethos kind of I get just absorbed into my art making process, where it's like the final product is like not the most important thing. It's like the drafting and the thinking of process. So to answer your question, like with No One Else, like I kind of wrote like a script and got stuck and then started drawing it and then like write and draw until I have this very like loose version of the whole thing. And then it was like refining. It was all digital. It was all basically like a set of Photoshop files that just got refined and refined, designed as spreads.
Huh.
That just got refined and refined, and like scenes were added, scenes were subtracted, and over the course of 2 years, and then the actual drawing part, that's the quick part. Like it's the kind of editing, and that's
So
where the
these are
real thought goes in.
like digital thumbnail sketches of a whole book you would have done, and then
So it starts off as like digital, like I mean they're at size, right? So they're like at whatever, you know, 600 DPI or whatever, but they're really 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 loose, and then they're like over the course of 2 years getting less and less and less and less loose,
huh.
right? Yeah.
You
So
would
it's,
finish the whole book though, and then refine that whole book.
I got to the end and then like it was a process of refining, yeah. But then like I would get to the end and then I would be like, okay, lose this scene, like put this scene back in, like how does this scene work? Nah. And it was just like very, very modular. You know, that was one reason I wanted to have like a 6-panel grid and stick to it pretty strongly, so like it was very easy to like switch stuff out and change stuff. But like that malleable digital process is really what allowed me to finish a book. And because I'm such a perfectionist, like having it all on paper and having it so arduous to edit is one of the reasons I would abandon it, because I just couldn't, I couldn't think on my feet in terms of like edit, right, like the adage is like writing is rewriting.
Mhm.
And that's the way I think, and that's just the way I operate. And like it wasn't until I had a digital process that like I think I could fully like um kind of operate in that way. But like that's not the only way to do it. Obviously, like if I had like there is something to be said about just committing and like doing that improvisation off of what you commit. And like, yeah, I see you do that, and it blows my mind.
2 pages of No One Else were 1 page, right? Isn't that how it was originally set up? So you did
Yeah,
like the
so
Ice Haven thing that Dan Clowes had done, where you split it in half and then.
that happened like yes, originally I was doing it twice as high, but like maybe like a third of the way into the process, I was like, oh no, this has got to be halfway down. So I was still editing. And when I did make that switch to like a 12 panel to a 6 panel grid, I like everything switched over where I started thinking in a 6 panel beat. And I just found that like I discovered that that was a default number of moments that seemed to suit me really well. Like, you know, Schultz had had 4.
Mhm.
Like for whatever reason, for me, like 6, like I could tell a joke, and I could tell the joke I wanted to tell in 6 panels, like comfortably, generally. And
Yeah.
it felt like a good rhythm. So it did start as 12, but early on I switched to 6, and the book as you read it was designed as like, it wasn't like I finished it and then cut it in half.
Okay. Okay. Ice Haven was an issue of 8 Ball,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah,
you wanted to make it into a book. You just cut the pages in half and then stack,
yeah.
publish it like
But that
that.
was always his plan. I think that was he designed it. Yeah, it was always the plan. I have both versions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
my favorite of Clowes' work. I think that's the best book he's done.
you know, it was always my favorite. And uh I remember when I got Wilson, it was kind of a disappointment to me.
Mhm.
For whatever reason, I just felt like it was like kind of ranty, I guess. Um, and then in writing No One Else, which is about the death of like a elderly parent, I fell so deep in love with Wilson, because it's about the same thing, right? It starts with the death of his father, and like something about like the opening kind of scene of that book is actually so heartfelt, like underneath the kind of funny, bitter protagonist, that Wilson actually, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's as good of a comic, but it's my favorite. Like
Yeah.
I used to like openly say like Wilson's a bad comic. Now it's like my favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the whole thing with that was that as Dan Clowes was in the hospital with his father who was dying, he had a Charles Schulz biography with him that
Mm,
Brian or David Michaelis, whoever the author's name was,
yeah.
he was relating Charles Schulz to his own father,
Mm,
and reading Peanuts, getting really into Peanuts. And so he liked the idea that Peanuts, if you read one of those collections from Fantagraphics, it there was a narrative thread that Charles Schulz hadn't necessarily imposed on the collection, but like you could read it as a full story because the seasons change and and
mhm.
there's little storylines and stuff. And then I
Yeah.
think that inspired him to write a story about what he was going through with his father, and use that style of like a here's like basically a supplement of the newspaper, like a comic supplement or something. So like
Yeah.
the styles change, like it's a different comic or something.
I think like, yeah, I was definitely kind of in that mode of thinking too, where like when I was working on No One Else, the 2 books that I was really thinking about, or 2 of the books that I was really like thinking about a lot were just the experience of reading Peanuts and Bill Watterson, which was like my favorite comic growing up.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And there is something about like just the utter precision of the timing in those comics.
Mhm.
They have to be, because they're funny. Well, to tell a joke, your precision, like it helps to have that precise timing, but also they had a limited amount of space.
Mm.
And like yeah, I kind of, that makes sense to me, just because like I remember like my relationship to Peanuts was like, I don't know if how's yours was, but when in the 90s, I would only see it on the Sundays, really, in my Sunday paper. And it was a bunch of like sight gags about like Woodstock and I'm just like, this old man is not making sense, bro. Like, I don't get this at all.
Yeah.
But then when you actually read the Peanuts collections and exactly what you're saying with like the continuity, but there'll be like 3 weeks maybe max where there'll be like a short fiction.
Yeah.
And like, because of that, like ultra precise metronomic timing, like those just like, those are so riveting. Those like 3 week, or like the two I think of is like Bill Watterson and the Clone Machine,
Yeah.
where the duplicator, I think is what it's called. And then so that's like, that is like a riveting page turning comic in the daily. And then when I discovered like the dailies of the Peanuts collections, do you know that the Sackhead story, where it's like everyone hates Charlie Brown, right? That's like the plot of the book.
Oh, but then I do know this. Yeah.
He goes to camp, and because of a rash on his head, he has to wear a sack on his head. And then because nobody can see him, they're like, oh, who's this lead? Like, tell us, leader. And then the minute he takes off the sack, everybody's like, wait, you're the leader? Like, screw you. You're dumb. Like, you still suck. So funny. And like those arcs are so they're riveting. And because of that timing. And like with No One Else, I was really thinking but the other thing is like they never actually feel like they have like a satisfying ending, because they go on forever. They're serials. So the story kind of like starts and then like fades into something else.
Yeah.
And like with No One Else, I was really thinking like, well, what if, and I think I'm not the first person to do this. I think Clowes and Tomina have done this in their books too, but it's like, well, what if this actually had an end? What if we like took that kind of precise timing and like gave it a satisfying ending,
That ending was amazing, man. That kind of shocked me. The last page, I was like, oh shit. I did not see that coming. I thought that was pretty great.
Oh, thank you so much, man. Thank you. Yeah.
But that's so funny about that. Like if you take a collection of those comics, like Gasoline Alley, for example, and you read like the Walton Skizik's volume, they really do kind of read like like an old, like maybe a Victorian novel.
Mm-hmm.
Those are more about like dialogue, relationships between people and things like that. They're very slow, but they have little storylines that come in and go in the middle of a big book, So like if you're reading like a Charles Dickens novel, it's like you have all these like little storylines that come in and you're like, oh, well, this must be the plot of the book. Now we're picking it up, but then that thing gets resolved and it's just back. And you're like, well, it's sort of this weird wave, And comic strips does the same thing.
Totally.
But I think it's probably because Victorian novels were serialized. A lot of them were.
Right.
So you had to keep the audience interested, and it's the same. They had to use the same little tricks that comic artists have to use.
That's a great metaphor. It's like, cliffhanger driven in a way.
Yeah. What if you did a graphic novel like that? Like where you just, people aren't even really sure what the plot is. It's like you introduce these characters and then you just keep them going for 500 pages.
I mean, isn't that like every Marvel and DC comic?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, but I don't,
Yeah.
It's like you're reading this thing and it's just basically about the characters. You don't even, you're right. It's Iron Man. Damn it.
It's right. So, but I mean, I think that's interesting. Like, I do think like the same way that I think like maybe Icehaven and Wilson and derivatively No One Else like took this idea. It's like, well, what if we give like this serialized thing an ending? Like if you look at the masterpieces of like superhero comics, which I'm not prone to do very often, it's like, it's like Watchmen, which is like, well, what if we make a superhero comic that actually has an ending? And The Dark Knight Returns, which is like, what is the ending of Batman?
Yeah.
And like when you look at the masterpieces, like in a lot of ways, they're doing exactly the same thing, where it's like, let's just stick an ending on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's impose some structure, right? Yeah.
Is that so? The way you designed No One Else was that it's 6-panel grid. Does it have to have? Does each page basically have to have its own little ending, the way that a 6-panel comic would? But
no. Not every single one, not every single page, but I was definitely thinking in spreads, and I definitely like if I had like the story beats, I definitely designed the story beats to end on the end of the page, or like I was definitely thinking like I was consciously like thinking about like each line has a beat at the end, each page has a beat at the end, and each spread has a beat at the end.
You would have a question be asked on panel 6 that's answered on panel 1 of the next page, right? I can't remember.
Oh, only if like that beat, like if like that felt like a good cliffhanger beat or whatever, like, you know, it doesn't have to end necessarily, but like I just felt like it did have to be like a satisfying unit,
Mhm.
which can be both like if you get lost in that shit, like you just spiral into like you know, too much thinking.
Yeah.
But if you just kind of like just draw it all and then take one step back and be like, okay, let me just like impose just a little bit of structure on this. Like I find that it gives the, at least in my own experience, I don't know if this is true for readers, but as for my own self, like it gave a really satisfying rhythm and like precise timing to it that just kind of built into the nature of turning pages.
Yeah, I felt that when I was reading it. It was like you could tell that it's like you were getting, it's like almost like you're getting pent up, and then you open and it's like the dream sequence pages, you know, where it's like there he is, it's like the illustrator coming out, like it's like you couldn't you just like had to go to town on this, you know, just for a second, and then we'll get back to the story, you know.
Yeah, I thought yeah, you know, it's like I was second guessing that just the other day. I was thinking about it. I was like, was I just flexing? Was I just trying to be like, hey, people reading Batman, like, look, I can draw? Or or was it like or but no, I think it was more just like I like those moments of like, yeah, I also added the color in there. Like I felt like there was like there's something to be said about a emotional gut punch of like of like a kind of more rendered thing
Mhm.
in the right moment. Usually like that's the thing, is like rendering a drawing a lot slows a reader down, but sometimes that's what you want to do, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Well, I use that stuff for pacing, you know, like if I have a book that's just 6 panel grid, 6 panel grid, it's like you I always feel like you have to give the reader like a break mentally, because it's like
totally
something beautiful to look at for a second. It's going to slow you down, which is going to help the rhythm of the story, but it's also going to give your mind a, you know, a nice break from little panel, little panel, little panel, you know.
100%, 100%. And like no one else like intentionally doesn't have chapters. It's like such a short book. It's kind of meant to be read in one sitting. And so like I felt like some of those moments with the 2-page spreads and stuff kind of act as almost like a psychological chapter break or something, or like a, to your point, like a resting point or something.
What stuff was lost? Like what elements of No One Else were taken away when you were writing it or editing it?
Um, I had like scenes. There's one scene in particular I think of, like where Robbie gets in a. We get to see Robbie is actually like kind of like a character who's like this happy. You see it in the book. He's like this happy-go-lucky character, and then occasionally his anger like wells up, and you see that he's keeping a lot of tension just below the surface.
Mm.
I had written a scene where he like that actually he's super drunk, and he actually like that actually turns violent. And I really like that scene, but it I don't know, it just didn't, just in pure, I don't have a reason, just pure intuition. I was just like, I know that he's capable of this. I don't know if anybody reading this book is going to like will recognize this aspect of his character, but I just don't need this scene in this book. And
But that
there's
would
a
have
few.
been something he inherited from his father, because you have that scene where his father embarrasses him with the girl. So it would have been read as this is something that's passed down to him by
Totally.
the father. But I know what you mean. It's like,
Yeah.
you know,
I, yeah. I also had a scene where Charlene, the mother, like you see her slowly evolve into like enjoying standing up for herself,
mhm.
which was like, I think the character arc that a lot of people probably read the book and or like what as a reader I would want for Charlene. I would actually want to see it, but I noticed that it actually like it was weakening the climax, because it was like you want the reveal, like not with, I won't put a spoiler in here, but you kind of want the reveal of how she's feeling like not to come until the end. So
Yeah.
if it kind of like inched toward there, then that lost its impact. So unfortunately, Charlene's arc kind of like you see her shift from like a like trying mom to a mom not trying, like in the very first chunk. And so her arc actually happens in the first like, you know, 15 pages or something, whereas the other two characters' arc happens throughout the book.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
felt really frustrated with her character, because it's like I felt like she was not paying attention to her duties, like as a mother. Her son had to pick up the slack, and she's just sitting in front of her computer. So did you know her? I mean, how much do you figure out a character before you write something like that? Like, how do you do that? How do you invent somebody like that?
I just kind of I think through the drafts, like I wrote as I mentioned, like I wrote all these other scenes with her in them and saw the way she behaved and everything, and like just kind of the character I knew that I wanted to have a character who essentially like just gets totally focused on like her thing instead of like addressing the rest of her life. Basically uses like classic workaholism, right? Which is like use work to like distract yourself from what's actually happening in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I have an element of that in my
Yeah.
yeah, I think a lot of cartoonists probably do. It's soothing. Cartooning, like sitting and drawing and finishing stuff is soothing.
Yeah.
And so I know I wanted to have that character, and then like the extremeness of it is in the book is pretty extreme, but also I think I've seen it happen. So
I don't know, that this is all like stuff that I'm thinking about now because of my own work and like what, you know, the point that I'm at. Like I just really want to get back to doing just graphic novels. Like I just miss doing that. I don't, you know,
sure.
I want to like write my own script. I don't want to follow history anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense. Dude, you I mean, you're so prolific, man. Like you can do one for them and one for you.
That's
like,
right. And I've done that stuff too. You know, I did a Grateful Dead book, and what do you think when you look back on Night Fisher? Did you cringe when you're looking at that older work, or are you impressed by yourself?
Yes. I spent like 2 months like doing like I kind of retouched all the lettering. Like this is how anal I got with it. But yeah, I retouched all the lettering. And I really wanted it to be like, well, how will this be perceived for like a 18-year-old reading it right now? Like, how could this be the best book for that 18-year-old is the way I approached it. And I also redrew like a bunch of the faces that I just wasn't satisfied with. And the funny thing, I spent 2 months doing that. And the funny thing is like, when I pick up the new edition, I look at it and I think like, I didn't change anything. Like this looks exactly the same. But then when I pick up the old edition, I'm just like, ugh, I can't look at this. Like there's so many, like so much shitty drawing in this.
Huh.
Yes.
I'm so impressed by your brush work when I look at that book.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah.
Incredible. And I remember I had the original copy of it, and I remember reading that and really liking it, and then finding you on Instagram and like, oh my God, it's the Night Fisher guy. Like look at it. He's like on Instagram. Like, holy shit. I thought like, oh man, like I didn't realize, I thought like I was the only one who, I was like, I recognize him. I wonder if anybody else recognizes him from his graphic novel that he did. It's like,
yeah, I pretty much, when no one else was coming out, I was basically thinking like nobody remembers that book, but it's really touching. You know, it's like occasionally I'll get like a message here and there. It's like this book meant a lot to me. I still reread it and stuff, and like that makes it all worth it. It really does.
What about film option rights? Do you get that?
I sold Night Fisher for a couple of years. That was nice. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like a ton of money, but it was probably more than I ever made off the book. So, but you know, that was nice. That was nice to get. I wish that it kept getting renewed and I kept getting cut that check. You know, if I spent 3 years on that book, while being like a waiter and trying to survive in New York as a young man, and to make that like economically like feasible, like I don't know, it's like I don't even think about money with the comics because it's just like I just think of it as like a hobby. Like I know that you're a big fan of Claire Briggs and have done those amazing like recolors and stuff. Like, and you also have like a stylistic affinity to Claire Briggs. And I'm sure you learn a lot by looking at the like rendering style and stuff. I also love that work. Like cartoonists get like indie cartoonists of our ilk like get a bad rap for being old timey. Like, here's my question for you: are you, when I let me frame it this way, when I like what I love about that stuff is that like when I read Frank King, it's not that I like old timey shit. It's that like it's a time when comics could just be overtly like human interest and not like genre in any way. It seems like adults were like, some adults at least were reading comics and they were just a normal part of American life, as opposed to this like niche collectors thing. Like, to what degree is the appeal of someone like Claire Briggs to you like that element of just like a normalization, and to what degree is it like that you are old-timey, that you like old-timey shit?
I don't think I'm really that old timey.
Yeah,
Not like Seth or Chris Ware or anything like that.
sure.
Um,
You don't play ragtime in your spare time?
no, I don't. But I think what I like about that stuff is sort of like the past has like an escapist quality for me. So
Mm,
when I'm reading that stuff, it's sort of like reading a history book because there's little details and things like that you pick up, and you can really connect with the past through old comics. The drawing style itself has like a warmth that I always try to get in my own work, where I want a mixture of that and like a European art, like Joan Spar or something. I want that kind of like confident looseness that old style cartoonists had, because I feel like that's like a craft that kind of epitomized cartooning. And I
yeah,
want to be like the ultimate cartoonist in that way.
yeah.
So I really take a lot from looking at that kind of work. Frank King, especially. God, I love Frank King.
I know, me too.
But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, in those Walton Skisic books, it's like you read them and they have like a whole notes section at the end from Tim Samuelson that explains like telephone poles back in that day had this. They give you these little history things about everything you're seeing in there that you might not understand as a 21st century reader.
I've never looked at those notes. I've got a bunch of the collections like up on my shelf, but I've never looked at those notes.
Those books to me I mean, I'll have them until I die. I love those books so much, and they just stopped making them, which sucks. But like, I understand why. But like,
Why? Why?
they stopped because of the Rachel character in it.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah,
DQ is just kind of like, we don't want to keep producing this stuff, which I totally understand.
yeah.
Um, but yeah. So that's all. Like, I look at that stuff as like ultimate traditional cartooning, and I want to get that stuff in my own DNA.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same way, where it's like totally like I try to surround myself with that stuff as much as possible, just to like reset my brain that like that is the meat that is like comics normalcy. That is like what, as opposed to like if you walk just into a comic shop, the mean of what is a normal comic, like to me it just feels so skewed and nothing like what I want like my work to be like, or what I want to read, or what I want to look at.
I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to know about your time in Rome, and like, was that inspiring in a similar way as Angoulême?
Oh, interesting. So yeah, I spent my junior year in Rome, and in college. So that would have been 2001. It was right after I got there, and then 2 days later, 9/11.
Oh no.
Yeah. So it, in terms of comics and its inspiration, so I at that point was like a junior in college, trying to prove to myself and to everybody, all my classmates, that like I could paint like John Singer Sargent. Like that was my thing. Like I just wanted to like flex. And the good thing about Rome was that like we went over there. I was over there with Paulo Rivera, a cartoonist that some of the audience might know, and Ryan Brown, also a cartoonist who drew God Hates Astronauts.
Mhm.
Anyway, we were all over there, and I'd never taken a comics class before at that point, but because we were just kind of alone and left to our own devices, we didn't really have class. We just had art history and Italian class over there. It gave me a chance to, instead of thinking like, I want to like show that I can draw better than everybody else, it just gave me to think like, well, what do I actually care about? Like, what do I actually want to do? And I was like, I want to write a comic book. Like I like comics. Like I forgot that I liked comics. And and so I fell back in love with comics in Rome, also partially because it was my first time out of the country, and I was just like trying, like doing a lot of navel gazing, frankly, like just like, what is my culture? Who am I? Like everything's foreign. Like who am I?
Yeah.
And so, but I think your question is like specifically, what is the comic scene like in Rome? And at that point, so 2011, I'd go to a regular bookstore, like the equivalent of like a small Barnes and Noble or something, and there'd be like maybe two small shelves with graphic novels on them, and those shelves included reprints of like Coconino's reprints of David Mazzucchelli's work, which I had never like. I hadn't read Batman Year One. I hadn't read any of the Daredevil shit. So my introduction to his work was the rubber blanket stuff, and which was impossible to get in the States at that point.
Yeah. Why hasn't he? You know him, don't you?
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
has he ever commented to you why he won't collect that in English?
He's never given me like he just seems utterly. I've asked him, and his answer, I can't remember his exact answer, but his answer is just like he has no interest in re-examining old work.
Jesus.
Yeah, I know. It's, I don't know, but I don't know. I think he strikes me as a perfectionist, like maybe worse than me, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to put words in his mouth. Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
But yeah, so there was that, and then there was also like Cortal Maltese was around,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that, like if you look at Night Fisher, like there's
I can see it.
there's cultural Maltese in there. Also, I was a painter at that time, so like like Night Fisher's kind of more painterly. So that stuff was around, and I kind of saw that stuff. But actually, it was like my Christmas break trip to London, where I actually got to go into like I think probably Forbidden Planet in London, and like that's where I bought the like Ice Haven floppy,
Yeah.
and that was where I was like, comics I can read, and like that was the thrill. So, but that I didn't really get a sense of like an Italian comic scene, if that's what the question was.
Yeah. All right, man. Let's end this so you can go out and look at apartments.
Send your pictures to dear old Captain Noah. Send today. Send right away. Send your pictures to dear old Captain Noah. Your colored pic will do the trick. Send your pictures to dear old Captain Noah.